The first shiver of unease, the one that truly registered deep in my bones, had nothing to do with a forgotten anniversary or a lipstick stain on a collar. It was a Tuesday. The sun was the kind of bright that feels aggressive at 8 a.m., and I was wrestling with the industrial-strength coffee maker that Leo, my husband of 12 years, had insisted was a necessary investment for a serious household. Leo was already at the table, scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed in that way I used to find endearing, the way that spoke of a man burdened by important things. Now it just looked like a permanent crease of dissatisfaction. With me, with the house, with the quiet rhythm of our life. "Big day at the office?" I asked, placing his mug, the one that said "World's Best Husband" that our daughter Chloe had painted for him 3 Father's Days ago, beside his elbow. He didn't look up. Yes. The Henderson merger. It's a beast. I watched him, this man I had built a life with. The faint threads of silver at his temples that made him look distinguished, the sharp cut of his jaw that I used to trace with my fingertips. We were partners. We'd started with nothing, a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled of damp and dreams, eating ramen noodles while we plotted our future. He was the ambitious architect, I was the steady engineer, holding the blueprint steady. I used my marketing degree to help him brand his first solo firm, Whitman & Associates. I was the Associates, the silent partner who handled the clients with too much ego and the projects with too little budget. And when Chloe came along, I stepped back happily to build the home that would be his sanctuary. But the sanctuary had grown quiet. Passion had cooled into a comfortable, if distant, companionship. Or so I told myself. I told myself it was normal, the natural evolution of a long marriage. The embers were still warm, I reasoned. We just had to fan them. I was thinking, I began, leaning against the counter. Maybe this weekend we could get a sitter for Chloe, drive up to that little inn in the mountains. The one we loved. He finally looked up and his eyes, those hazel eyes I'd fallen into at 22, were flat. "Ava, I can't. You know how it is. This merger, it's all-consuming. Maybe next month." Next month. It was always next month. Promise was a hollow coin, currency in a kingdom that no longer existed. "Right," I said, the word tasting like ash. "Of course." Later that day, while Chloe was at school and the house was steeped in a silence that felt accusatory, I decided to tackle Leo's study. He hated when I messed with his system, but a thin layer of dust had settled on everything, and my need for order, for control in some small corner of my life, overrode his fussiness. I was dusting the framed photo of us on our wedding day, my smile too wide, his arm too tight around my waist, both of us blindingly young, when my elbow knocked over a small carved wooden box he kept on the shelf. It was a gift from a client from Japan, and I'd always thought it was empty. It wasn't. Papers fluttered out. Receipts mostly. For a hotel I'd never stayed in. A jeweler I didn't patronize. And then my fingers closed around a smaller, thicker card. It was a business card, but slick and personal. The name made my blood run cold. Serena Thorne, interior design consultant. Serena. The name was a ghost that had been haunting the edges of my life for over a year. She was the new, dazzling talent Leo had hired to redesign the firm's offices. I'd met her once at the company's Christmas party. She was maybe 28, all glossy black hair and a laugh that was like shattering glass, sharp and attention-grabbing. She'd clung to Leo's arm that night, calling him a visionary, and he'd preened under the attention. I'd felt a pang then, a primitive warning, but I'd dismissed it. Leo was successful, attractive, ambitious women were drawn to that. He was a loyal man. Wasn't he? My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked up the business card. On the back, in Serena's looping, arrogant script, was written, "L until we can make it official. Forever feels too short. S. Official." The words seemed to pulse in the quiet room. What did official mean? Moving in together? An engagement? Cold, clear certainty washed over me. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. Something structural. I spent the next hour in a fugue state, my body moving on autopilot while my mind raced. I put everything back in the box exactly as it was. I finished dusting. I made dinner. When Leo came home, I really watched him. The way he checked his phone with a faint secret smile. The way his eyes skipped over me, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. That night, as he slept, the digital glow from his phone on the bedside table illuminating the sharp plane of his cheek, I made a decision. Comfortable numbness was gone, burned away by the cold fire of suspicion. I was no longer just Ava, the wife, the mother. I was a woman who had been betrayed, and the first ember of a plan, not for reconciliation but for understanding, began to glow in the dark. I would not confront him. Not yet. Confrontation gave the power to lies and excuses. I needed truth. I needed to know what official meant. And for that, I needed to become a ghost in my own life, listening, watching, learning. The Ava he thought I was, the trusting, slightly boring domestic wife, would be my greatest camouflage. The war for my life had begun, and he didn't even know he was on the battlefield. The days that followed were an exercise in surreal duality. On the surface, I was the same Ava. I packed Leo's lunches, I attended PDA meetings, I asked about his day with a placid interest that hid the churning acid in my stomach. I was an actress playing the role of a lifetime, and the set was my own home. But beneath the surface, a new, sharper version of myself was emerging. I started with the digital world. Leo had always been careless with his passwords, a trait I'd once found charmingly untech-savvy. Now it was a fatal flaw. One evening, as he dozed on the sofa after a brutal day at the office, I gently pried his phone from his lax fingers. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I navigated to his email, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped the device. There it was. Not in his main inbox, but in a folder labeled Henderson, a neat, cynical little hiding place. The emails were a mix of the professional and the profoundly intimate. Discussions about fabric swatches and lighting plans seamlessly bled into arrangements for weekend getaways, and love letters that made my skin crawl. My dearest Leo, one from Serena began. I hate that you have to go home to her. This purgatory is torture. Every night you spend in that house is a night stolen from us. I can't wait until the paperwork is finalized and we can be together, openly. This secrecy is killing me. Paperwork. The word was an ice pick to my heart. What paperwork? A prenuptial agreement? For us? The thought was so alien it was almost laughable. Kept scrolling, my vision blurring. Another email from Leo to her sent just 2 days ago. Patience, my love. The final hearing is next Thursday. Once the judge signs the decree, I'll be free. I've already put the down payment on the penthouse. Our new life is so close I can taste it. Soon you won't be my secret. You'll be my wife. The world tilted. The floor beneath my feet seemed to liquefy. Decree. Free. Wife. He was divorcing me. He was secretly divorcing me. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had orchestrated my obsolescence with the cold efficiency of one of his business deals. He was erasing me from the legal record of his life without even the decency of a conversation. I was a problem to be solved, a contract to be terminated. A raw, gut-towel sound tried to escape my throat, and I choked it back, my hand flying to my mouth. Tears of sheer, unadulterated fury burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He didn't deserve my tears. He deserved my wrath. I carefully deleted the trace of my snooping from his phone and placed it back on his chest, my fingers curling into claws. I looked at his sleeping face, so peaceful, so utterly unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in the woman standing over him. He was dreaming of his new life, his new wife, his penthouse. He thought he had it all figured out. Cold, hard calm settled over me, smothering the initial shock and rage. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. This was about a man who believed he could dismantle my life, the life we had built, without my knowledge or consent. He thought I was a fool. A placid, unassuming housewife who would simply accept her fate when he finally decided to serve the papers. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, I called an old university friend, Ben Carter. Ben was now one of the most formidable divorce lawyers in the city, a shark in a Seville row suit. We'd lost touch over the years, buried in the busyness of our separate lives, but the connection had been real. He'd had a crush on me back then, something I'd gently deflected for Leo. The irony was a bitter pill. "Ava Whitman," he said, his voice warm with genuine surprise when I got him on the line. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need your help, Ben," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. "It's about Leo. I know he's planning to divorce me." There was a beat of silence on the other end, the professional switching on. "Planning? What do you mean?" I told him everything. The emails, the secret divorce proceedings, Serena. I laid out the horrific puzzle, and I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Ava, if he's filed for divorce without your knowledge and somehow had you served at a false address or manipulated the process, that's not just grounds for contesting it. That's fraud. It's a legal atrocity." His voice was hard now, the warmth replaced by a cold, focused anger. "We need to find that filing. Immediately." While Ben worked his legal magic, I began my own investigation. I hired a discreet and expensive private investigator. "I want everything," I told the stoic man named Miles. "Financial records, property deeds, his schedule, her schedule. I want to know what he had for breakfast and what shade of lipstick she wears." The information began to trickle in, then flood. Leo had been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts into a new, private one. He'd used our shared assets as collateral for the loan on the penthouse, a stunning glass-walled apartment with panoramic city views, bought in his name only. The final hearing was indeed in 1 week. He had used a legal loophole, claiming we'd been separated for over a year, a blatant lie, and had filed the paperwork in a county known for its rapid, sometimes careless processing. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to leave me penniless and blindsided. He would have the firm, the new penthouse, the young wife. I would have the remnants of a life he considered obsolete. The night before the hearing, Leo came home early. He was jittery, excited, his eyes alight with a secret triumph. He barely looked at me. "You're in a good mood," I commented, stirring a pot of pasta on the stove. "Just a big win tomorrow," he said, pouring himself a whiskey. "A real game changer." I smiled, a slow, cold smile he didn't see. "I'm sure it will be, Leo. I'm sure it will change everything." He was so wrapped up in his own fantasy. He missed the steel in my voice. He had no idea that while he was dreaming of his new beginning, I was preparing for his end. The hearing wasn't his victory lap. It was going to be his execution. And I was going to be the one holding the axe. Courthouse was a monument to cold bureaucracy, all echoing marble and the scent of old paper and despair. I arrived early, dressed not in the frumpy, heartbroken attire Leo might have expected, but in a sharp, tailored black dress and heels that clicked with purpose on the polished floor. Ben was at my side, a fortress in a pinstripe suit, his briefcase containing the arsenal that would detonate Leo's world. We took our seats in the back of the assigned courtroom. It was mostly empty, a few lawyers murmuring with their clients. My heart was a steady, determined drum, not a flutter of nervousness in sight. I was past nerves. I was in the eye of the hurricane, a place of terrifying calm. Then he walked in. Leo with his lawyer, a smarmy-looking man I recognized from a few firm events. And beside him, clinging to his arm as if for a photo op, was Serena. She was a vision of predatory glamour in a tight cream-colored sheath dress, her smile victorious. She looked around the sterile room as if it were the chapel of her dreams. They didn't see us. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table, their backs to us. Leo leaned over and whispered something in Serena's ear, and she let out a soft, tinkling laugh that grated on my every nerve. The judge, a weary-looking woman with sharp eyes behind her glasses, entered and we all rose. Proceedings began with a dull murmur. A few uncontested divorces were processed quickly. Then it was our case. Whitman versus Whitman. This is a hearing for the dissolution of marriage between Leonardo Whitman and Ava Whitman, the clerk announced. Leo and his lawyer stood. Serena preened. Your Honor, Leo's lawyer began, this is a straightforward matter. The parties have been living separate and apart for the required period, and my client is seeking a final judgment of divorce, with the marital assets to be divided as per the prenuptial agreement. The judge glanced at her file. And the respondent, Mrs. Whitman, has been properly served and has filed no response? This was our cue. Ben stood, his voice a cannon shot in the quiet room. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, I am Benjamin Carter, representing the respondent, Ava Whitman, and we are here to vigorously contest this proceeding on the grounds of fraud, duress, and a fundamental violation of due process. The effect was instantaneous. Leo's head whipped around so fast I heard his neck crack. His eyes, wide with sheer, uncomprehending shock, locked with mine. For a glorious second, I saw the man beneath the facade, the scared, cornered boy who had just realized his perfect plan was a house of cards. Serena's triumphant smile melted into a confused gape. What is the meaning of this, Mr. Carter? The judge asked, her interest clearly piqued. Your Honor, Ben continued, smooth as silk, my client was never served. She only discovered these proceedings by accident days ago. She has been living with Mr. Whitman continuously throughout the alleged separation. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Whitman has committed fraud upon this court and is attempting to perpetrate a massive financial fraud upon my client. Ben began to lay it out. He presented the evidence my PI had gathered. Bank statements showing the siphoned funds, the loan documents for the penthouse using our marital home as collateral, photographs of Leo and I together as a family throughout the past year, even the testimony of our neighbors. He painted a picture of such calculated, cold-blooded betrayal that I saw the judge's lips tighten into a thin, disapproving line. Leo's lawyer was sputtering, objecting, but he was completely blindsided. Kept shooting Leo furious, bewildered looks. Your Honor, Ben concluded, his voice dropping to a respectful but firm tone, this is not a divorce. This is an attempted theft. My client has been her husband's business partner and homemaker for over a decade, and he has sought to discard her like yesterday's trash, leaving her with nothing while he absconds with their assets to begin a new life with his. He paused, glancing at Serena with barely concealed disdain. Paramour. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. The judge leaned forward, her gaze boring into Leo. Mr. Whitman, these are very serious allegations. Do you have any explanation? Leo was pale, sweating. The distinguished architect was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he was about to be sick. Your Honor, there must be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was clear and steady, cutting through his stammering. Every head in the room turned to me. Was your belief that I was too stupid or too weak to fight back? Leo stared at me, and in that moment I saw not just shock but the first flicker of fear. He was finally seeing me. Not the wife he took for granted, but the woman he had created. The judge didn't take long. She vacated the divorce decree on the spot, citing egregious fraud. She froze all of Leo's assets and placed a restraining order on the penthouse and our joint accounts. She awarded me temporary full possession of the family home and substantial spousal and child support, pending a full forensic accounting and a new, proper divorce proceeding. As the gavel fell, a sound that echoed like a death knell for Leo's future, the calm in me finally broke, not into tears but into a wave of pure, vindictive triumph. Leo stumbled away from the table, his lawyer hissing in his ear. Serena was on her feet, her face a mask of fury and panic. Leo! What is this? What's happening? He didn't answer her. He was still staring at me, his world crumbling around him. I walked towards him, then a protective presence at my shoulder. I stopped a few feet away, meeting his horrified gaze. "You," he whispered, his voice ragged. "You ruined everything." I smiled then, a small, cold, perfect smile. "No, Leo. You planted the seeds. I'm just here to watch the harvest." I turned and walked out of the courtroom, the clicks of my heels the only sound in the stunned silence I left behind. The first battle was won. The war for everything he held dear had just begun. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Leo was barred from the family home by the temporary order. He moved, presumably, into a hotel, as his shiny new penthouse was locked in legal limbo. The firm, Whitman and Associates, began to hemorrhage clients. News of the scandalous court hearing, expertly leaked by Ben to a few key business journalists, spread through the city's professional circles like wildfire. The narrative was irresistible. The esteemed architect who tried to secretly divorce his wife and steal the family fortune. I, on the other hand, embraced my new role with a ferocity that surprised even me. I was no longer Ava Whitman, the supportive wife. I was Ava, the phoenix, rising from the ashes of my betrayed marriage. My first act was to reclaim my professional space. I walked into the offices of Whitman and Associates for the first time in years. The receptionist, a young woman who had probably been hired by Serena, gaped at me. "Mrs. Whitman." The Mr. Whitman isn't in." "I'm not here to see him," I said, my voice cool. "I'm here to see my office." I strode past her, through the open-plan space that had been Serena's design. It was all cold minimalism, chrome and white leather, a style that was as personality-free as she was. I found what had been Leo's office and walked in. His desk was still littered with blueprints and models. Smelled of his cologne and arrogance. Serena appeared in the doorway, her face a thundercloud. "You can't be in here. This is private property." I turned slowly, taking her in. Without the glow of her illicit triumph, she looked brittle, her beauty hard and desperate. "Actually," I said, picking up a small model of a building I'd helped him land, "as half-owner of this firm, thanks to my years of unpaid labor and the legal principles of marital property, I can be anywhere I please. You, on the other hand, are fired." Her jaw dropped. "You can't fire me. Leo is currently facing financial ruin and 3 separate lawsuits, one of which I'm filing for misappropriation of company funds to finance your affair," I finished for her. "Security will see you out. Please leave your keycard." I watched as the reality of her situation dawned on her. Penthouse was gone. The wealthy husband was broke. The glamorous job was over. The life she had so carefully stolen was turning to dust in her hands. She spat a few venomous, unoriginal curses at me before flouncing out, but the victory felt hollow. She was just a symptom. Leo was the disease. A few days later, he came to the house to collect some of his things. I let him in, standing guard in the foyer as he moved through the home we'd built, a stranger now. He looked diminished. The expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and stress. "Are you happy now, Ava?" he asked, his voice heavy with self-pity. "You've destroyed me. The firm is on the verge of collapse. My reputation is in tatters." I laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "I destroyed you. You were the one who decided to cheat. You were the one who decided to commit fraud. You were the one who thought you could throw me away without consequence. You built your own gallows, Leo. I just handed you the rope." He stopped, a box of his books in his hands, and looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you like this." The apology, if it could be called that, was too little too late. It was the plea of a man facing consequences, not one seeking genuine redemption. "You didn't think you were hurting me when you were lying to me every day? When you were planning your future with another woman in our bed?" I shook my head, the anger a cold, hard stone in my chest. "You did not mean for it to go this far, Leo. You just never realized I could go further." He left soon after, a broken man carrying the shattered pieces of his life in a cardboard box. I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street. The house was silent, but for the first time, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was mine. I had one. I had the house, the money, the moral high ground. I had exposed him and ruined him. But as I looked around at the perfect empty living room, a new, unsettling feeling began to creep in. Now what? Revenge had been a powerful fuel, a reason to get out of bed, a purpose. But it wasn't a foundation to build a new life upon. The ashes of my old life were all around me, and I was standing in the middle of them, victorious and utterly alone. The war was over. The battle for my soul was just beginning. Winning, I discovered, could be its own special kind of prison. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was a brutal, clinical dismemberment of our shared life. Ben was merciless, and rightly so. I was awarded the house, a massive lump sum settlement, and a significant portion of the value of the firm, which was forced into sale to cover the debts Leo had accrued. Penthouse was sold, the proceeds coming to me. Leo was left with a mountain of legal fees, a bankrupt business, and a reputation so tarnished it was unlikely he would ever practice architecture in this city again. It was everything I had fought for. It was justice, served cold on a silver platter. So why did my chest feel like a hollowed-out gourd? Why did the silence in my beautiful house feel so heavy, so accusing? I tried to fill the void. I went on a shopping spree, buying clothes I didn't need and art that didn't speak to me. I redecorated, purging the house of every trace of Leo, painting over the colors he'd chosen, throwing out the furniture he'd loved. I turned his study into a bright, airy studio for myself. But the new things were just things. They held no memories, no warmth. Chloe, my bright, beautiful 8-year-old, was struggling. She missed her father, and she couldn't understand the complex, ugly reasons for his absence. I had to sit her down and give her a sanitized version of the truth, that Mommy and Daddy loved her very much but couldn't live together anymore. It was the hardest conversation of my life, watching the confusion and hurt cloud her eyes. My revenge had collateral damage, and her name was Chloe. I threw myself into being a mother, a single mother. I attended every school event, helped with every project, baked cookies that turned out slightly burnt. I was trying to be both mother and father, and I was failing at both. The guilt was a constant, gnawing companion. One rainy afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic, a final purge of the past, when I found a box I hadn't seen in years. It was from my university days. Inside were faded photos, notebooks filled with my cramped, eager handwriting and sketches. I had almost forgotten. Before Leo, before marketing, I had wanted to be a writer. I'd written short stories, fragments of novels, filled with the passionate, unjaded hope of a 20-year-old. I sat on the dusty floorboards, surrounded by the ghosts of my former self, and I cried. I cried for the girl I had been, the woman I had become, and the future that stretched before me, empty and terrifying. I had been so focused on destroying Leo's life that I had forgotten to plan for my own. My friend Sarah, who had been a rock throughout the ordeal, dragged me out for coffee. "You need to get out of that house, Ava," she said, stirring her latte with a determined clink. "You need to meet people. Live a little." "I'm fine," I said, the automatic response of the walking wounded. "You're not fine. You're a ghost. Revenge isn't a life plan. It's a demolition project. Now you have to rebuild." Her words struck a chord. She was right. I had been the avenger. Now I had to become the architect. But of what? A few days later, while dropping Chloe off at a new art class, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. Literally. I was juggling my purse, Chloe's art smock, and a cup of coffee when I turned a corner and collided with a solid wall of a man, sending my coffee cascading down his pristine white shirt. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I gasped, fumbling for napkins. "It's quite all right," adds character, a warm, deep voice said. I looked up and froze. It was Ben Carter. But not the sharp, intimidating lawyer from the courtroom. This was Ben with his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, a faint smudge of clay on his trousers, and a small, shy boy hiding behind his legs. "Ben," I said, stunned. "Ava." He looked equally surprised, then glanced down at his ruined shirt with a wry smile. "Fancy meeting you here. Although your methods of greeting are aggressive." I felt a genuine laugh bubble up in my throat, the first one in months. "I'm so sorry. Let me. I'll pay for the dry cleaning." "Don't be silly. This is Noah's class," he said, gesturing to the boy. "My son. Noah, this is Ms. Whitman. She's an old friend." Noah peeked out and gave a small wave. I learned that Ben's wife had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. He was a single father, navigating the same lonely, challenging waters I was. We started talking. First, awkwardly in the hallway. Then, over coffee while the kids were in class. Conversation was easy, free from the baggage of my past with Leo. We talked about our kids, our failed dreams. He'd wanted to be a historian, the absurdities of single parenthood. He was witty, kind, and there was a deep, settled sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own. He didn't see me as the betrayed wife or the vengeful husband-destroyer. He saw me as Ava. And for the first time since my world had shattered, I felt seen. It was a small, fragile spark in the hollow victory of my life, but it was a spark. And after so long in the dark, even the smallest light can feel like a sun. The weekly art class drop-offs became the anchor of my week. My conversations with Ben evolved from polite chit-chat to real, meaningful connection. We were two people who had been scarred by life in different ways, both learning to navigate a map we never wanted to read. One Saturday, he asked if Noah and Chloe could have a playdate at the park. It was a simple question, but it felt momentous. It was a step out of the shadow of my past and into the tentative light of a possible future. The afternoon was lovely, simple and uncomplicated. Kids, after initial shyness, chased each other across the grass, their laughter a sound that healed something deep inside me. Ben and I sat on a bench, watching them, talking about everything and nothing. He told me funny stories about his disastrous attempts at baking, and I told him about my rediscovered writing notebooks. "You should start again," he said, his tone earnest. "You have a story to tell." "Several, I'd imagine. Most of them are pretty depressing lately," I admitted. "Then write a new one," he said simply. "You're the author." His faith in me was a gentle, unexpected gift. With Leo, my ambitions had always been secondary, supportive. With Ben, they were my own, worthy of pursuit for their own sake. I did start writing again. First, it was just cathartic ramblings, pouring my anger and grief onto the page. But slowly, it began to morph into something else, a story of resilience, of a woman finding her voice. It wasn't my story, not exactly, but it was fueled by my truth. Meanwhile, the legal and financial dust was settling. Leo had accepted a job offer in another state, a humbling step down from his former glory. He was moving. The news should have felt like a final victory, but it just felt finished. A chapter closed. He asked to see me one last time before he left. We met at a neutral, anonymous cafe. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, the arrogance completely gone. He was just a man, weary and defeated. "I'm leaving for Chicago tomorrow," he said, stirring his coffee aimlessly. "I heard. Ava, he struggled for words, his gaze fixed on the table. "What I did to you, it was the biggest mistake of my life. I was blinded by, I don't even know what. I lost everything that actually mattered." I listened, silent. The anger was gone, replaced by a distant, almost clinical pity. "Serena left me," he continued, a bitter twist to his mouth. "The second the money dried up. You were right about her. About everything." "It doesn't matter anymore, Leo," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. His regrets, his realizations, they were his to carry. They no longer had any power over me. He looked up, his eyes searching mine. Is there any chance? Any chance at all for forgiveness? Not for us, I know that ship has sailed. But just for peace. I looked at this man I had loved, built a life with, and then systematically destroyed. I thought of the hollow victory, the lonely months, and the slow, gentle reawakening I was experiencing with Ben. I forgive you, I said, and the words were true. They weren't for him, they were for me. Holding on to the hatred was a poison. Letting it go was my final act of liberation. But forgiveness isn't absolution. You have to live with what you did. I have a new life to build. He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He looked broken, truly and completely. He had gotten everything he thought he wanted, freedom from me, and it had ruined him completely. As I walked away from the cafe, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound sense of closure. The door on that part of my life was shut, locked, and the key had been thrown away. That evening, Ben came over for dinner. It wasn't a grand, romantic gesture. It was pizza and a movie with the kids. But as I sat on the sofa, Chloe curled up on one side of me, the warmth of Ben's presence on the other, I felt a sense of wholeness I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Later, after the kids were asleep, we stood in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. The domesticity of it was comforting, not stifling. "Thank you," I said softly. He looked at me, a question in his kind eyes. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the woman from the courtroom. Just me." He reached out, his hand gently brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. Touch was electric, but in a gentle, grounding way. "Ava, that's the only you there is." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the dishwasher and the soft glow of the kitchen light, I knew. Revenge had been about the past. This fragile, hopeful thing with Ben was about the future. Leo's plan had been to build a new life on the ruins of mine. He never realized his plan would ruin him completely. But my plan, the one I was only just beginning to draft, was to build something beautiful, strong, and entirely my own from the ashes he'd left behind. And for the first time, I was excited to pick up the pen. Building a new life, I discovered, was nothing like the dramatic demolition of the old one. It was slow, deliberate work, like laying bricks, one by one, on a solid foundation. And the foundation I was learning was trust. Trusting Ben was the first and most terrifying brick. Our relationship unfolded with a gentle cadence that was the antithesis of my whirlwind youth with Leo. There were no grand, sweeping declarations, no intense, all-consuming passion that burned too bright and fast. Instead, there was consistency. There was the quiet understanding in his eyes when I had a bad day, the way he remembered how I took my coffee, the effortless way he included Chloe in outings with Noah. It was on a weekend trip to a cabin by the lake, a few months after we'd officially started dating, that I truly understood the difference. We were a foursome, Ben, me, Noah, and Chloe. Kids were fishing off the dock with comical intensity, and Ben and I were sitting in Adirondack chairs, watching the sun dapple the water. "I never thanked you," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "For everything you did. As my lawyer, I mean." He glanced at me, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You paid my bill, Ava. Quite handsomely, if I recall. You know what I mean. You were my knight in a pinstriped suit. You saw the worst moment of my life, and you fought for me." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the water. "I was angry," he admitted. What he did, it wasn't just a betrayal of a marriage. It was a betrayal of basic human decency. And seeing you, so strong and so determined in the middle of that storm, he paused, searching for the right word. "It was an honor to stand next to you." His words washed over me, warm and genuine. With Leo, compliments had often felt like negotiations, tools to get what he wanted. Ben's words were simply gifts, offered with no expectation of anything in return. Later that evening, after the kids were tucked into their bunk beds, exhausted from fresh air and adventure, Ben and I sat by the stone fireplace. Crackling logs were the only sound for a long while. "I think I'm ready," I said softly, my eyes fixed on the flames. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice low. "To let it all go." The anger, the need for revenge, served its purpose. Now it's just wait. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise. "Then let it go," he said. "You've carried it long enough." And in that moment I did. I imagined the last of the bitterness, the image of Leo's shocked face in the courtroom, the sound of Serena's shrill voice, the cold feeling of betrayal, lifting off my shoulders and dissolving into the smoke rising up the chimney. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. My life was beginning to take a new shape. Inspired by Ben's encouragement and my own rekindled passion, I had started writing in earnest. I joined a writer's group and I was working on a novel. It wasn't about a vengeful wife, but about a woman rediscovering the world through travel. It was my escape and my therapy. I also started a small freelance marketing consultancy, working from my new home studio. I chose my clients carefully, working with small, passionate business owners, mostly women, who reminded me of the person I used to be. I was using my skills for myself on my own terms. Band Associates was finally just me. One night, over dinner at my house, Ben looked at me across the table, his expression thoughtful. "You're different, Ava," he said. "You have this light about you now. It's good to see." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm finally building a life that fits me, not one I'm supposed to fit into." It was true. The life I was building with Ben and our children was collaborative, a joint venture based on mutual respect and a shared history of loss and hope. It was sturdy. It was real. Leo had tried to build his new life on the rotten foundation of a lie and a stolen fortune. It had collapsed under its own weight. My new life was being built on the bedrock of hard-won self-respect, forgiveness, and a love that was growing slowly, deeply, like the roots of an old, strong tree. His plan had been to ruin me, but he had only succeeded in clearing the ground for me to build something far more beautiful than he could ever have imagined. The gallery opening was a milestone I hadn't seen coming. My novel, The Color of Second Chances, wasn't a massive bestseller, but it had found its audience. A local book club had chosen it for their monthly read, and to my astonishment, had worked with a few local artists to create pieces inspired by the book. They were hosting a joint art and book event. Standing in the bright, bustling gallery, surrounded by strangers holding copies of my book, listening to them discuss my characters as if they were real people, was surreal. It was a validation of a dream I had buried so long ago I'd forgotten the shape of it. I felt a gentle pressure on the small of my back and turned to see Ben, his eyes shining with pride. Noah and Chloe were there too, dressed in their best clothes, looking bored but dutifully impressed. "You did it, author," Ben whispered, leaning close. "You wrote a news story." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of joy, of completion. He was right. I had. Later, as the crowd thinned, a familiar figure caught my eye near the entrance. My breath hitched. It was Leo. He looked older, thinner, his shoulders slumped. He was watching me from a distance, a complex mix of emotions on his face, regret, sadness, and perhaps a flicker of awe. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. There was no anger left in me, no schadenfreude. There was only a distant, quiet pity. He was a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the person I had become without him. Then he turned and melted back into the night. Ben's hand found mine, his grip firm and reassuring. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. Seeing Leo had been the final, gentle closure. He was a chapter in my past, but Ben, our children, this new life, they were my present and my future. A year later, on a sun-drenched afternoon in the backyard of the house that was now truly a home, Ben and I were married. It wasn't a massive, lavish affair like my first wedding. It was simple, filled with the people who mattered most. Sarah was my matron of honor, beaming. Noah and Chloe, now the best of friends, served as our adorably serious ring bearer and flower girl. As I stood facing Ben, my hands in his, I listened to the celebrant's words, but my mind was drifting through the journey that had brought me here. The shock of discovery, the cold fury of betrayal, the calculated execution of revenge, the hollow victory, and the slow, beautiful, sometimes painful process of healing. "I promise to cherish you," Ben said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes locked on mine. "To support your dreams, to stand by you in calm and in storm, and to love you and the family we've created for all the days of my life." My vows were similar, but I added one line of my own. "I promise to always build with you," I said, "on a foundation of honesty, respect, and the beautiful second-chance love we've been so lucky to find." As he kissed me, surrounded by the joyful cheers of our friends and the laughter of our children, I knew with absolute certainty that Leo's plan had indeed ruined him completely. His betrayal had been the catalyst for the destruction of everything he held dear. But for me, his betrayal had been the brutal, necessary fire that cleared the way for this. For a love that was deeper for having been tested by life. For a family that was stronger for being chosen. For a life that was truly, wholly, and joyfully mine. He had tried to end my story, but he'd only forced me to pick up the pen and write a better one. And this one, this story of second love and a hard-won peace, had a much happier ending. In fact, it was only just beginning. The end.